What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to my subscribers, and if you're new here, welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. So it's come up recently on my channel about trying to put food plots in areas where the soil isn't all that great. We're talking about like rocky soil or just other areas where the soil is not all that great. Now, you can still do it. So I want to explain sort of what your process is going to be in order to get those food plots established. Now, obviously, anytime you're planting in less than ideal situations, you're not going to have that big booming food plot that you see on social media when guys love posting those pictures of their nice lush food plots. But guess what? If you're in those areas that have poor soil or poor natural habitat, putting in a food plot is still probably going to end up being the #1 attraction, food attraction in the area. And because of that, even if it's not as good as, say, somebody else's food plot, it's still the best food plot in that area because of that terrain or because of that natural habitat, the natural soil in that area, whatever it might be. So you are still going to attract all of the deer from the area to your food plot, and you're going to have a successful hunt because of that. So, all right, what we need to do to take care of this is we need to take advantage of planting 2 different crops in the same year. And I know some of you might be thinking like, hey man, I'm like in the northern part of the country. I don't barely have 1 growing season, much less 2 growing seasons. And that's fine. We don't actually need to grow any of these things to their maturity where they would if we were trying to, like, say, harvest them and get the grain or the seed out of them. We're just trying to get them to where they are going to build our soil over time. So you're going to get 2 crops a year of doing this, and after a while you're going to build up that top layer of soil and you're going to have really nice soil there. But there's a couple other tips and tricks we can throw in order to get you to that the first year without having to just wait year after year after year. Now, yes, each year it's going to get a little bit better for you and better and better and better. So you want to just keep doing this and keep building that soil, but we can get you to have a successful year that first year. So it is January right now. So I am going to start with what you should do this spring if you want to try to do this for a food plot in an area with less than ideal soil. So first off, what we got to do is wait for spring green up. And then we're going to want to spray and we're going to want to take care of all of that natural vegetation. Now, don't do it right at spring green up. You're going to be wasting chemicals if you do that. But what you're going to want to do is give spring green up, say, a couple weeks, a month. Just keep an eye on it. What you're trying to avoid here is having all that natural vegetation pop up and get like so lush that when you do spray it, you're only spraying that top layer of it, and then you're not actually getting a full kill on it. So you want it to like leaf out and germinate, but not so much that you're going to have a ton of thatch left over after you spray it and kill it off. So the other reason why you don't want to do this right away at spring green up is all the natural vegetation sort of like germinates at different times. So you don't want to like spray what germinates immediately at spring green up, and then you're going to come back a couple weeks later and it's going to look like you didn't even do anything because everything else that kind of germinated after that popped up and flourished. So just give it some time. We're in no rush at spring green up. Just give it some time, but keep an eye on it that it's not like getting super thick on you where it would be like really hard to get chemicals down on it. And now we can do this without chemicals too. I know some guys don't like to use chemicals. I like to use chemicals as a tool when they are going to benefit me the most, and then I cut back on them once they're not as advantageous to me. But when we're trying to start a food plot, that is when they are the most useful because we have to handle that natural vegetation up front. And once it's taken care of, the process that I'm about to explain will take care of your weeds more naturally. But if you use the chemicals up front, it will knock them out and you won't have to deal with them going forward. If you want to try to deal with them a different way, like by plowing or disking or tilling over and over and over again until they keep like reseeding themselves, then you got to till again and reseed themselves and over and over and over again. You can do that too if you don't want to use chemicals. By all means, if you don't want to use chemicals, you don't have to. I'm just saying this is probably the fastest, easiest way to do it. But I also try to minimize the amount of chemicals I use. 1, cost, and then 2, yeah, I don't like to be spraying a ton of them if I'm not actually needing to do so. So, all right, what you want to do is make sure you're taking care of that natural vegetation either through spraying, and I use glyphosate and 2,4-D. Glyphosate is going to kill your grasses that are growing in there, but it's also going to pretty much harm anything else that's in there as well. But the problem with that is it's just going to harm your broadleaves. It's not actually going to kill them. So that 2,4-D is going to take care of those broadleaves for you. So where I'm at, I have to deal with burdocks a lot. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's like a big broadleaf that's like almost like rhubarb looking. And if you let that go on a food plot, just one stalk can shade out a huge area of your food plot, and you end up having nothing grow in that area. So even if I spray and I miss some or whatever, and I end up seeing burdock growing in my food plots, I'll go out there with a shovel and chop each one out by hand, because they're just so detrimental. Those broadleaves are just so detrimental to the success of your food plots. So what you want to do, make sure your native vegetation is taken care of however you want to do that. If you're going to spray, like I said, you want to spray later after everything's germinated, but before it gets too lush that the chemical's not actually getting down and touching like everything. Otherwise, you're going to have to spray a couple times. If it is too lush, you are going to have to spray maybe 2-3 times. In a lot of other videos, I'll tell you to just spray 3 times, but I've been trying to cut back on how much I spray, and a lot of times I find that spraying 1 time is more than enough. And we try to stick to that. Just spray 1 time, but then take a look at it. If it looks like it needs another hit, then hit it again. But don't think that you have to buy enough chemicals to spray it 3 times up front. Like, to save your money, do it 1 time, see what happens, and then we'll get going. So then what I like to do in where I'm trying to build soil and in these areas, but also deal with suppressing my weeds, is I plant buckwheat as a summer cover crop. Now, buckwheat is also what is known as a green manure, so this is really going to help your soil. So what you'd want to do is, if you're in like the northern part of the country, so like I always would say this for like my northwestern Wisconsin food plot, but this can really be anywhere in that northern part of the country, from like Duluth to Buffalo, in that snow belt along the Great Lakes there, and then, I mean, extend it on to wherever you need to. I would be targeting the middle of August for my fall planted food plots, and buckwheat needs to be planted 6 to 7 weeks before that. So we're going to be targeting about the end of June, early July for the planting of that buckwheat in those areas. And now if you like line up with like southern Wisconsin, so like my southeastern Wisconsin food plot, I would just add 2 weeks to that. So I can be planting my buckwheat, if I'm going to use it as a summer cover crop, at like the end of July, or late July, I should say, down there. And then again, we're going to add 6 to 7 weeks before we plant our fall focused food plots. But I'm just going to use that like northern area in this video as the baseline for these dates. Just remember, you can add time to it if you're further south, but that's just because those northern areas are typically where we're going to be needing to build soil a lot more than down south, where we have better soil quality. So, all right, that end of June, beginning of July time period, you get that buckwheat planted down. Now, that buckwheat is going to grow so fast and so lush that it is going to choke out any native vegetation. So like I was saying, we can handle the native vegetation without spraying as long as you kind of dealt with it up front. Now we throw the buckwheat down, it chokes everything out. It's going to make this nice, lush, thick stand of buckwheat, choke everything else out. We wait that 6 to 7 weeks, and then what we need to do is we need to plant a cereal grain. So I love using winter rye if you're where it gets cold. Winter rye, a lot of guys talk about winter rye on YouTube here, and that's kind of made it a lot harder to find winter rye. It's made winter rye become more expensive. Really, you can use any cereal grain, but winter rye is most ideal in areas where you're going to get colder temperatures sooner in the season, because that winter rye will stay growing at a much lower temperature. But you can use wheat, you can use rye, you can use oats, and you can use barley. You can use any cereal grain. Whatever's cheaper is ideally going to work for you. And I always talk about, I love diversity in my food plot, so you could mix them together too. Maybe you do want to put a little bit of winter rye out of there so you still have some attraction when it gets cold out, but maybe you mix in some oats just because it was cheaper and you don't want to be spending a ton of money on seed for your food plots. It will work. It'll give you diversity. Diversity is always great. So all right, you seed into the standing buckwheat. Don't knock it down yet. You got to make sure you seed into the standing buckwheat. And I like to do this when the soil underneath is a little bit soft. So like if you've had a dry spell, I like doing it when that soil is a little bit soft. Yes, these cereal grains will literally grow anywhere, but getting enough like soft soil to kind of get them to kind of get into the soil works a lot better than letting them sit on top of dry soil waiting to get kind of like sucked into the soil so that they can start growing. So once that seed is all spread, you crimp that buckwheat. Now a cultipacker works awesome, but cultipackers are pretty spendy. So what I use is just a lawn roller. And a lot of times I don't even put water in the lawn roller. It's more than enough to just roll and knock down all of the buckwheat, crimp all the buckwheat without even any water in it. But putting water in it and getting that extra weight is really going to give you that like mash down to like push that seed more into the dirt. Like I said, cereal grains are easy to grow anywhere, but they will grow a lot better, a lot faster if they get a little bit more seed to soil contact. So just getting that extra little push on them or press on them because the soil's either soft or because you're like putting more pressure on them with like a lawn roller that's filled with water or whatever else you guys can get your hands on to try to crimp that buckwheat, get it knocked down, get it taken care of. Now what happens though, this is how we're building soil, is that buckwheat is now laying on top of that seed like a thatch. So just like if you were trying to plant grass seed in your lawn and you would throw straw down on top of it, that's what this buckwheat's going to do. But first, all that moisture is going to come out of that buckwheat now that it's crimped, and that moisture is going to go into the ground. It's also going to hold any moisture in the ground for that seed as well. So just like that straw on your grass seed, it holds the moisture in. So if you're not getting a lot of rain in your area either, this is awesome for that as well, because it's going to hold that moisture on that seed, on that soil. It's not going to let the sun like beat down and bake all of the moisture out of it and dry out the dirt. So the other thing though, what this does over time is that buckwheat's going to decay, and all of that organic matter is going to seep into the soil and stay in the soil, and you're going to little by little start to create a layer of topsoil on top of your area that you're planting or seeding. And so this is just planting one. Now what's going to happen is these cereal grains are going to come up. They're going to grow. This is going to be your food plot that you're going to hunt over, because this is what's going to attract the deer. So if you planted that buckwheat the end of June or the beginning of July, you're going to be targeting the middle of August for the plant date of the cereal grain and then the crimping of the buckwheat. Now when you crimp that buckwheat, I also do like to just hit it up one more time with glyphosate just to kill anything else that might be sticking up or popping up. I don't usually have issues with the buckwheat itself popping back up, but every once in a while you'll notice, hey, there's a little bit of native like vegetation in there, and this is your chance, your last chance, just to hit it up one more time, knock that stuff out so that it's not competing with your cereal grain. Now, when we plant our cereal grain in the middle of August, we need to have one thing in mind. Do we plan on layering it? And so if we're going to layer it, we don't plant as much up front as if we were only planting one time. Now, the advantage to layering is it is a way that you can try to figure out if your deer are over browsing your food plots. And if they are, you just layer in more seed and more will grow, and you can just keep building it thicker and thicker by laying in more seed. But if you want to just throw down all your seed at once, you can do that too. And this is probably just more dependent on what access you have to where your food plots are. Like for me, my northwestern Wisconsin property is pretty far away, so to try to go up there every few weeks to try to do something ends up taking a lot more time than if this was like just in my backyard or whatever. So this might be more dependent on like your distance from where these areas are, how much time you have to work on them, and so on. But what you're going to want to do is target that beginning of August plant time. Now, if you do want to go with the layering method, again, like 3 weeks later, which is going to be like the beginning of September, you can layer in some more seed then. And then again, you can hit it up at the end of September, and you should still get all of this growing. You're going to have these all growing at like different ages too, so that's attractive to the deer. You're adding diversity to your food plot, even though it might be the same thing you're planting, just because they're at different ages, and they might be more attractive to the deer based on the age of the plant that's growing, but also a great way to deal with if the deer are over browsing your food plots. So once that grows, we just let it, we enjoy the season, go hunt it. You should be attracting all the deer in the area, especially if you're in an area that's got really poor soil. This stuff will grow anywhere. And so what we want to do then, though, is fast forward to the next spring. So these cereal grains are going to last for as long as they last into the winter before the deer browse them down to nothing. But then in the spring, especially if you planted winter rye, that winter rye is actually going to green up and start growing a couple weeks before spring green up. So that actually does help your deer herd if they're in areas where like they have a lot more stressful winters. It's going to give them food a couple weeks earlier than everything else greening up in the woods. And that's a way of like getting them out of the winter just a little bit sooner. They're very malnourished that time of year. I know most guys don't have their cameras out that time of year, but if you do, they are so skinny that time of year. They are like just coming out of winter on fumes. So if you can get them out just a little bit sooner, a couple weeks sooner by having those cereal grains planted, especially that winter rye in those colder areas, and it pops up and it greens up for them, you're going to help them survive that winter just a little bit better by shortening winter just a little bit for them. So what's going to happen though is it's going to pop up in the spring. They're going to feed on it, but it will eventually start growing because everything else in the woods is going to green up as well. And the deer are going to have so many options for food that your food plot's not exactly the height of the attractiveness that it was, say, during like the rut or during the fall when all the leaves and stuff were falling off of the trees. So that's fine though, because what's going to happen is that cereal grain's now going to grow again, and it's going to grow to whatever height it gets to, probably about the height that that buckwheat was at when you terminated it. And again, now we repeat the process. So around the end of June, beginning of July, you're going to go out there and you're going to want to seed your buckwheat into your standing cereal grain. And then you're going to crimp your cereal grain. Now, cereal grain does not crimp as well or as easy as buckwheat does. So this is where if you're using like a cultipacker, it does work a little better. If you're using something like a lawn roller, I just go over it like a bunch of times. Like instead of just going over it once like I have to do with the buckwheat, I just keep rolling over it with the lawn roller as many times as necessary. I am definitely going to hit it up with one spraying of glyphosate here though, just to make sure it's all killed off and knocked down to let that buckwheat quickly take off. So once you get this going, this is what I'm talking about, where you really don't need to be using that many chemicals because you're just going from buckwheat choking out everything to a cereal grain choking everything out. And you just keep switching back and forth. You're getting two terminations. You're getting a termination of buckwheat and a termination of cereal grain every year. That's adding all of that organic matter back into your soil. You're going to slowly but surely build your soil over time. Now, this is how we do it with what we're planting. The other thing you can do is by all means go dump as much lime as you need to get that pH in that soil to where it needs to be. Dump as much fertilizer in there as you need to as well. If you can get a hold of like manure, or even if you want to take in topsoil's not cheap, but if you could like get topsoil delivered to your site, or depending on the size of your food plot, if we're talking about just like a little 1/4 acre honey hole in the woods, you guys can micromanage those small plots a lot more than like guys who are trying to put in like 20 acres of food plots. So if we're just talking about that little 1/4 acre honey hole, by all means carry in some topsoil, throw some topsoil in there, definitely get that lime so your pH is getting up to where it needs to be. Throw in the other fertilizers to get everything going to where it needs to go. But like I said, if you're trying to do this on like the macro scale, it's going to be just a long haul of like terminating these twice a year. You're going to eventually build up some topsoil. If you do this though, do not disc or till or plow, because what you're going to do is that little bit of top layer that you work so hard to create is just going to get mixed in with all the other bad soil, and you basically did all of that for nothing. So I do from time to time use a cultivator without any weight on it. So the cultivator actually kind of just bounces along the top of the soil, and it just agitates that very, very top layer just enough just to kind of give me better seed to soil contact. But what I found that works a lot better is just make sure that you're seeding after you've had like a rain or something. You also always want to try to seed in front of a rain, but either way you want some soft soil to be putting that seed into so that it really grabs a hold and has some decent contact so that it'll grow faster and better for you. So all right guys, I hope that helped. If it did, if you feel like you got some value out of this, do me a favor, hit that like button, leave me a comment down below, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.